The silence in this little apartment is a different kind of silence than the one I knew in my own home. For 60 years, the silence in that house was a living thing, a soft blanket woven from the threads of memory. It was the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the gentle groan of the floorboards settling, the distant whisper of wind through the ancient oaks my grandfather had planted. That was the silence of peace, of contentment, of a life lived and cherished. This new silence is a sterile, hollow thing. It is the silence of absence, the silence of 4 blank walls that hold no stories, and a window that looks out onto a street filled with strangers. My tea has long since gone cold on the small table beside me, its untouched surface a mirror to my own stillness. It's been 3 months since my daughter, my only child, Amelia, told me my presence was an inconvenience to her newfound fortune. It's been 2 months since I packed a single suitcase and walked away from the only home I had ever known. And it's been 6 weeks since the first tremors of my quiet revenge began to shake the foundations of her gilded world. People might call me vindictive, a bitter old woman. I suppose, in a way, they are right. But they don't know the full story. They don't know the years of sacrifice, the endless river of love and support that flowed in only one direction. They see a heartbroken mother and a wealthy daughter, a simple, sad story of generational divide. They don't see the truth. They don't know that the $50 million lottery ticket she clutched like a golden scepter was, in fact, the most expensive piece of paper she would ever own, for it cost her everything that truly mattered. And she never even thought to check the deed to the land she stood on. That was her first, and most critical, mistake. My story with this land didn't begin with me. It began with my grandmother, a woman with hands as tough as leather and a spirit as resilient as the wild prairie grass. She and my grandfather bought the initial 100 acres with money saved from years of backbreaking farm labor, seeing not just dirt and trees, but a legacy. They built a small farmhouse, the bones of which still exist as the garden shed near the rose bushes. My father inherited it, and with my mother, he slowly, painstakingly, transformed the farmhouse into a proper home, adding a wing here, a porch there, his love for my mother hammered into every nail and joint. When I married Robert, my Robert, a man whose gentle nature belied a brilliant mind for business and an unwavering sense of foresight, we didn't move away. We stayed. We built upon that legacy. Robert loved the land as much as I did. He saw its intrinsic value, not just in dollars and cents, which he was very good at calculating, but in its soul. He was the one who, over 30 years, strategically bought the adjacent parcels as they became available. A 10-acre plot from a neighbor moving west, a 25-acre stretch of woodland from a logging company that deemed it unprofitable. He never did it with loans. He would work, save and invest, and when the time was right, he would pay in cash. Debt is a leash, Eleanor, he used to say, his hand resting on mine. We will own our life, not rent it. By the time he passed away 10 years ago, our 100 acres had become 300. Our home, the one my father built, sat nestled in the heart of it, a sanctuary of brick and wooden memory, protected on all sides by a buffer of our own forest, our own fields. Robert was meticulous. He was also, I now realize, something of a prophet. In the last years of his life, he became preoccupied with the future, with protecting what we had built not just from financial hardship, but from foolishness. He saw a flicker of something in our daughter, Amelia, even then. A casual disregard for the value of things that weren't shiny and new, a sense of entitlement that pained him. We had, perhaps, made her life too easy. We paid for her entire university education, a master's degree in art history that she never once used professionally. We gave them the down payment for their first house, a sizable sum that we never called a loan, but which was never acknowledged as the gift it was. When her husband, Mark, wanted to start a boutique marketing firm, it was our money, from our savings, that provided the seed capital. The business limped along for years, a vanity project more than a viable enterprise, but we never asked for a penny back. We bought our granddaughter Lily's first bicycle, paid for her braces, and set up a modest college fund for her, the one act of generosity I never regretted for a second. Robert saw the pattern. She takes, Eleanor, he told me one evening, his voice heavy with a sadness that went beyond the words. She takes and she doesn't see the source. It's like she thinks the well will never run dry. It was shortly after that conversation that he sat me down with his lawyer, a kind, sharp-as-a-tack man named Mr. Henderson. The three of us spent an entire weekend restructuring our assets. The house itself, the physical building and the 2 acres immediately surrounding it, remained in my name, my sole and separate property. But the other 298 acres, the vast, valuable sea of land that cradled my home, were placed into an irrevocable trust, the Robert and Eleanor Vance Legacy Trust. Robert had been clear about its purpose. It was to preserve the land, to prevent it from being sold off piecemeal, or developed by a future generation that didn't share our values. I was named the lifetime trustee, giving me full control and use of the land for as long as I lived. Upon my passing, the trust would be managed by a board, including Mr. Henderson's firm and the dean of the local university's Environmental Sciences Department. Its primary beneficiary was not Amelia. It was Lily, but only upon her 30th birthday, ensuring she was mature enough to understand its significance. Until then, the trust was instructed to use its resources to provide scholarships for students in agriculture and environmental science. Amelia was named as a minor, secondary beneficiary, entitled only to a small annual stipend, the amount of which was left to my discretion as trustee. When I asked Robert why he was doing this, why he was cutting Amelia out so severely, his answer chilled me. Because, my love, he said, taking my hands in his, money doesn't build character, it reveals it. And I fear that if Amelia ever comes into a large sum of it, she will not use it to build, but to destroy. This way, the land is safe. Our home is safe. You are safe. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious, even a little cruel. Now, I see it for what it was, the final, most profound act of love from a husband who was determined to protect his wife even from beyond the grave. He knew. Somehow, he knew. The day Amelia won the lottery, my first feeling was one of pure, unadulterated joy. She called me, screaming with such delight that I could barely understand her. $50 million. It was an astronomical sum, a number so large it felt like a fiction. I cried with her on the phone, my heart swelling with happiness for her, for Mark, for my sweet Lily. My immediate thought was that all their struggles were over. Mark's perpetually failing business, their mortgage, the constant low-grade anxiety about money that seemed to cling to them like a damp coat, it was all gone. They were free. I imagined them paying off their debts, investing wisely, securing Lily's future beyond anything I or Robert could have managed. I imagined family vacations we could all take together, the joy and relief that would finally allow them to relax and just be. For the first few weeks, it was a whirlwind of excitement. They were in the papers, on the local news. I clipped every article, my heart bursting with a silly, maternal pride. I hosted a small family dinner to celebrate. I made Robert's favorite pot roast and used my wedding china. Lily was giddy, talking about getting a pony. Mark was expansive, talking about investors and opportunities, a new energy crackling around him. Amelia was radiant, but different. A new hardness had settled in her eyes, a sheen of cool assessment that I hadn't seen before. When I gave her a gift, a simple, framed photograph of her as a little girl on the tire swing Robert had hung from the big oak, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, that's sweet, Mom," she'd said, placing it face down on a side table where it was promptly forgotten. That should have been my first warning. The change was gradual at first, a slow cooling of relations. The weekly Sunday dinners I had hosted for years stopped abruptly. When I called, Amelia was always busy. "We are meeting with the financial planners, Mom, we have a consultation with a luxury car dealership, we are flying to the city to look at couture." Her voice had taken on a new cadence, one of impatient importance. The daughter who used to call me for recipes, or to complain about her day, was replaced by a CEO of a corporation I wasn't a part of. Mark was worse. He started calling me Eleanor instead of Mom, a small but significant shift that felt like a deliberate distancing. He would talk down to me, explaining basic financial concepts as if I were a simple-minded child, forgetting, or perhaps choosing to forget, that I had managed our family's considerable investments alongside Robert for 40 years. He spoke of their new brand, their public profile, their need to cultivate an image of success. My modest, comfortable home, once a cherished family hub, was now a potential liability to that image. The first direct mention of the house came about a month after their win. They arrived unannounced one Tuesday afternoon, driving a sleek, black European car that looked alien and predatory parked on the gravel driveway my father had laid. They didn't come inside for tea. They stood on the porch, their expensive clothes looking out of place against my weathered rocking chairs. "Mom," Amelia began, her tone carefully neutral, "Mark and I have been talking. We've been doing a lot of thinking about the future. The thing is, Eleanor," Mark cut in, taking over as he so often did, "this location is prime. Absolutely prime. It's secluded, it's expansive. It's the perfect spot for an estate. Not just a house, an estate." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "My house is on this spot," I said quietly. Amelia waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of such casual arrogance it took my breath away. "Well, yes. And it's been a lovely house. For its time. But we're thinking bigger. We've seen some incredible architectural plans. Glass walls, an infinity pool, a 10-car garage. A place we can entertain properly, you know. For the kind of people we'll be associating with now." I stared at her, my daughter, a stranger wearing her face. "You're talking about tearing down my home," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. "My father built this house. Your grandfather. Robert and I lived our entire lives here. You grew up here, don't be so sentimental, Mom," she chided, a slight edge to her voice. "It's just wood and bricks. We are talking about an opportunity to build a real legacy for our family." For Lily, the irony of her using the word legacy was so bitter I could almost taste it. They saw legacy as something you could build with a checkbook, a monument to money. They didn't understand that legacy was the invisible architecture of memory, of love, of lives lived in the very wood and bricks she was so eager to pulverize. I tried to reason with them. I suggested they could build anywhere. With $50 million, the world was their oyster. They could buy a pristine plot of land on a lake, a cliffside property overlooking the ocean. "But we want this land," Mark insisted, his jaw set stubbornly. "It's family land. It should have a family estate on it that reflects our new status." The argument that day ended in a stalemate. I was shaken, deeply wounded by their callousness. They left in a cloud of dust and indignation, clearly frustrated by my unreasonableness. I thought, perhaps naively, that they would reconsider once they cooled down. I thought that surely my daughter's love for me, her connection to her own past, would outweigh this sudden, monstrous ambition. I had no idea how wrong I was. Their next visit, 2 weeks later, was not a discussion, it was a presentation. They came armed with a portfolio of glossy architectural renderings and floor plans. They spread them out on my oak dining table, the one Robert had built, covering its warm, scarred surface with cold, impersonal images of a glass and steel monstrosity that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a home. Mark led the presentation, pointing out the media room, the wine grotto, the master wing, which was larger than my entire ground floor. Amelia stood beside him, nodding, her arms crossed, a look of grim determination on her face. They had it all planned out. Demolition of my house would begin in the spring. Construction would take 18 months. They spoke of it as a foregone conclusion, a simple matter of logistics. I listened in silence, my heart growing heavier with each word. The sheer scale of their self-absorption was breathtaking. They hadn't considered my life, my memories, my comfort for a single second. It was all about what they wanted, what their money could now buy them. When Mark had finished his spiel, he looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for applause. "And the best part, Eleanor," he said with a magnanimous smile, "is that we are not just casting you aside. We've designed a lovely little guest house for you at the far end of the property. About 800 square feet. It'll have its own kitchenette, a nice little patio. You'll be right here with us, but with your own privacy, a guest house," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. They were offering me a glorified shed, a granny flat, on the ashes of my own life, and framing it as an act of profound generosity. "Of course," Amelia added quickly. "You'll be so much more comfortable. No more stairs to worry about, no big old drafty house to maintain. We are doing this for you, too, Mom." That was the moment something inside me snapped. The years of quiet resentment over their casual taking, the pain of their current disregard, the deep, aching grief for the husband who had foreseen this very moment, it all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. They weren't just erasing my home, they were trying to erase me, to shrink my existence down to a manageable, convenient footnote in their grand new life story. I stood up, my hands surprisingly steady. I looked from my daughter's face, now a mask of impatient resolve, to my son-in-law's smug, self-satisfied smirk. I looked at the glossy pictures of the vulgar palace they wanted to build, and then around at my living room, at the worn armchair where Robert used to read, at the faint pencil marks on the doorframe marking Amelia's height as a child, at the faint scent of lemon oil and old books that was the smell of my life. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. Amelia's face tightened. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "You will not be tearing down my home." "This conversation is over," Mark scoffed, an ugly, dismissive sound. "Eleanor, you're being emotional. You have to be practical. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. My life," I said, looking directly at Amelia, "is not a development opportunity. This house is where I lived with my husband and raised my child. It is where I intend to live out the rest of my days. You have $50 million. Go and build your palace somewhere else." The ugly confrontation I had been dreading was now upon us. Amelia's face, which had been tight with resolve, now crumpled into a mask of pure fury. The pretense of care and consideration vanished, revealing the raw, ugly greed beneath. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "After everything. This is the biggest thing that has ever happened to us, and you're trying to ruin it with your selfish sentimentality." "Selfish?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Amelia, I have given you everything you have ever asked for, and much that you never thought to ask for. I have paid for your education, your home, your husband's hobbies. My sentimentality, as you call it, is for the life your father and I built, a life that provided the foundation for the very one you are so eager to bulldoze." Mark stepped forward, his expression menacing. "Now, listen here, Eleanor. That money changes things. We are not the same people we were 2 months ago. We have a certain standard to uphold now. We can't be expected to live in a modest suburban house while our mother sits on a 300-acre gold mine in a decaying farmhouse, decaying." I looked him straight in the eye. "This house has stood for 70 years and will stand for 70 more. It has better bones and more integrity than you will ever have." That was when Amelia delivered the final blow. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or affection I had ever known. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "If that's how you want it. But you need to understand something, Mother. This is our land now. By right, it's mine. You're just living on it. We've been more than generous offering you a place here at all. If you won't accept our very kind offer, then you will have to leave. We will be proceeding with the demolition in the spring. You have until then to find somewhere else to live." I stared at her, my mind reeling. The sheer audacity, the breathtaking cruelty of it. Kicking her own mother out of her home. Her childhood home. She wasn't just my daughter anymore, she was a stranger, a conqueror planting a flag on land she believed she had won. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or cry. A profound and chilling calm settled over me. It was the calm of a general who has just seen the enemy's final, fatal miscalculation. They assumed ownership. They assumed power. They assumed I was just a sentimental old woman they could easily push aside. They had forgotten who Robert was. And they had certainly forgotten who I was. "I see," I said softly. "You have made your position very clear." I turned and walked toward the kitchen, my back straight. "Then I believe there is nothing more to discuss. Please see yourselves out." I heard them sputtering behind me, shocked by my sudden acquiescence. They left, not in a triumphant storm, but in a confused, angry huff, the glossy renderings still spread across my dining table like a declaration of war. I walked over, gathered them up, and without a second glance, dropped them into the recycling bin. The next day, I began to pack. Not everything. Just the things that held the soul of my life. My photo albums, Robert's favorite books, the hand-carved decoy duck he'd made one winter, my mother's jewelry box, and the quilt my grandmother had stitched by hand. I packed these treasures into 2 suitcases. The furniture, the china, the physical objects, they were just things. The house itself was the true vessel of my memory, and since they intended to destroy it, I would take its spirit with me and leave them with nothing but an empty shell. I didn't tell them when I was leaving. One rainy Tuesday morning, I called a taxi, loaded my suitcases into the trunk, and took one last long look at my home. I looked at the porch swing, at the rose bushes Robert had planted for me, at the towering oaks that stood like silent, faithful sentinels. I said a quiet goodbye, not to the building, but to the life I had lived within it. Then I got in the taxi and drove away, leaving the key on the kitchen counter. My first call was not to a real estate agent or a friend. It was to Mr. Henderson. I met him the next day at his quiet, wood-paneled office downtown. He listened patiently as I recounted the entire story, from the lottery win to the final, cruel ultimatum. His expression grew steadily grimmer, his fingers steepling in front of him. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, looking at a framed photograph of himself and Robert on a fishing trip many years ago. "He knew," Mr. Henderson said, his voice soft. "Robert always said that character is what you do when you think no one is watching, or when you think you have all the power. He worried this day might come, he did more than worry, didn't he?" I asked. A slow smile spread across Mr. Henderson's face. "Oh, yes, Eleanor. He did much more than worry. He planned. The Robert and Eleanor Vance Legacy Trust is an ironclad legal instrument. You, as the lifetime trustee, have absolute and sole authority over the use and disposition of all 298 acres of that land. Amelia has no claim, no right, no say whatsoever. The house and the 2 acres it sits on are yours alone. For them to evict you from your own property is, of course, laughable from a legal standpoint. But for them to assume they can demolish your house to build on land they do not own. Well, that moves from the realm of family drama into some very serious legal territory. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. But it was followed by a cold, sharp-edged resolve. Robert had given me the shield. It was up to me to wield it as a sword. "What do you suggest we do?" I asked. "We could send them a simple letter informing them of the trust," he said. "Or," he paused, a glint in his eye, "we could wait. Let them proceed. Let them hire their architects, their surveyors, perhaps even their demolition crews. Let them invest their own time and, more importantly, a significant amount of their own money into this fantasy. The further they go down this road, the more impactful the revelation will be. It felt cruel. It felt calculated. It felt like something born of resentment and a desire for retribution. And I embraced it completely. "We wait," I said. So I moved into this small, furnished apartment, a place of quiet anonymity. I instructed Mr. Henderson to monitor the situation. Reports trickled in. An architectural firm in the city had been retained. Surveyors had been seen on the property, mapping out the footprint for the new mansion. A contract was signed with a high-end construction company. Mark and Amelia were bleeding money, pouring their lottery winnings into the foundations of a dream that stood on ground they believed was theirs. They never called me. Not once. I imagine they thought I had scurried away, a defeated old woman, leaving them to their victory. They were probably renovating my home in their minds, picking out marble for bathrooms I had scrubbed, designing a kitchen where I had baked countless birthday cakes. The thought didn't bring me pain anymore. It brought a strange, detached sense of anticipation. I also made one other call, to my granddaughter, Lily. I met her at a park near her school. She ran to me, her arms wrapping tightly around my waist, her face buried in my coat. "Grandma, I miss you," she whispered. "Mom and Dad are acting weird. They are so angry all the time and they keep talking about a new house." I held her close, stroking her hair. I didn't want her to be hurt, but she needed to be kept separate from the poison. "Sometimes, sweetie," I explained carefully, "grown-ups get so excited about new things that they forget about the old things that are important. But I love you very, very much, and that will never, ever change." I assured her we would see each other, just not at the old house for a while. It was a delicate, painful conversation, but a necessary one. She was the one piece of this I needed to protect. The day of reckoning came 6 weeks after I had moved out. Mr. Henderson informed me that a demolition permit had been filed with the county, and a crew was scheduled to begin work the following Monday. It was time. He drew up the documents. They weren't angry or emotional. They were cold, legal, and absolute. A formal cease and desist order, a notice of trespassing, and a detailed summary of the Robert and Eleanor Vance Legacy Trust, complete with copies of the original signed documents highlighting my position as sole lifetime trustee and the true disposition of the land. We didn't mail it. Mr. Henderson arranged for a legal process server to deliver it to them in person, on a Friday evening, to ensure it ruined their entire weekend. The call came Saturday morning. It wasn't Amelia. It was Mark. His voice was a strangled mix of disbelief and fury. "What is this, Eleanor? What kind of sick game are you playing?" "It's no game, Mark," I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "It's a legal document. I believe it's all quite self-explanatory, a trust." "What trust?" "That land is Amelia's inheritance," he yelled. "You are mistaken," I said coolly. "The house is mine. The land belongs to the trust." Robert was a very thorough man. "You cannot build on property you do not own." I could hear Amelia screaming in the background, a raw, animal sound of pure rage and thwarted desire. "You can't do this," Mark bellowed. "We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars already. On architects, on deposits. We have contracts." "That sounds like a personal problem, not a legal one," I replied, the words tasting sweet and just. "Perhaps you should have done your due diligence before spending your money. A simple title search would have revealed the truth. But you were so certain, weren't you? You assumed. You erased me from the equation, and now you have to deal with the numbers as they actually are." There was a long silence on the line, filled only by his heavy breathing and Amelia's continued hysterics. "What do you want, Eleanor?" he finally asked, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. A payout? Is that it? Name your price. We can make this go away, and there it was. The belief that everything, even a mother's love and a lifetime of memories, had a price tag. That loyalty and dignity could be bought and sold. There isn't enough money in the world, Mark, I said softly. You wanted the land. You were willing to destroy my home, my life, to get it. You were cruel and dismissive and ungrateful. And now you have nothing. You have your $50 million, but you have nowhere to build your castle. This was never about money for me. It was about respect. A lesson you have both failed to learn. I paused, then delivered the final, quiet blow. Do not contact me again. From now on, you may speak to Mr. Henderson. Any attempt to set foot on the trust's property will be met with legal action. Goodbye, Mark, and with that, I hung up the phone. The silence that followed in my small apartment was no longer hollow. It was filled with the resonant hum of justice, of reclaimed power. It was the silence of peace, a new kind of peace, one that I had fought for and won for myself. The aftermath was messy, but it was their mess, not mine. I learned through Mr. Henderson that they had tried to fight it. They hired their own high-powered lawyers who, after reviewing the trust documents, likely told them they had no case. The trust was, as Mr. Henderson had said, ironclad. Their dream mansion was dead, and they had a mountain of non-refundable deposits and contractual kill fees to pay for a ghost project. They had tried to bully the county, to plead their case with the construction company, but the chain of ownership was clear. They were powerless. Amelia tried to call me a few times. I never picked up. She left rambling, tearful messages, swinging wildly between apologies and accusations. She blamed Mark. She blamed me. She blamed her dead father. She never once took responsibility for her own greed. The person I did hear from was Lily. I continued to meet her at the park. One afternoon, she looked at me with her startlingly perceptive eyes. Mommy cried a lot, she said. She said you took the house away. I sat her down on the bench. Sweetheart, the house is still there. No one took it. But sometimes people need to learn that you can't buy everything, and you must be kind to the people who love you. Your mother and father, they forgot that for a little while. This is just a grown-up timeout, she seemed to understand. Her love was the one pure, untainted thing in this whole sorry affair, and I guarded it fiercely. 6 months after I hung up on Mark, I made a decision. I didn't want to live in the big house alone anymore. The memories were still there, but they were now tinged with the sadness of the conflict. The victory felt complete, but it didn't compel me to return to the past. So, with Mr. Henderson's help, I executed a new plan. I legally subdivided the property. The house, and a manageable 10 acres of gardens and meadows around it, I kept for myself. The other 288 acres of the trust's land, I authorized for sale, but not to a developer. I sold it, for a very fair, but not exorbitant price, to a state conservation group, who pledged to turn it into a public nature preserve, named the Robert Vance Memorial Park. The proceeds of the sale went directly back into the trust, exponentially increasing its scholarship fund for generations to come. As for my house, I didn't sell it to strangers. I made a new arrangement with the trust. The house would be leased for a nominal fee to the university's Environmental Sciences Department, to be used as a residence for visiting professors, or postgraduate students conducting research in the new preserve. Robert's legacy wasn't a mansion, it was education, it was preservation. With the proceeds from the sale of my own home, I bought a beautiful condominium in a new city, one with a view of the ocean. It's smaller, but it's mine. It is filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with the possibilities of the future. I have traveled. I have joined a book club. I have made new friends. I see Lily every other weekend. She takes the train to visit me, and we walk on the beach. She loves it here. Amelia and Mark, from what I hear, finally bought a house. A large, ostentatious place in a gated community, filled with other people who value image over substance. They have their money, but they lost their family home, their legacy, and any claim to the moral high ground. They are surrounded by expensive things, but I suspect they are terribly lonely. Sometimes, I sit on my balcony, a cup of tea in my hand, and I watch the sun set over the water. The silence here is different yet again. It's not the silence of contentment or of absence. It is the silence of liberation. I am no longer just a mother, a widow, a caretaker of a legacy. I am Eleanor. I am the architect of my own peace. My daughter won $50 million, but she lost the world. I lost a house, but I reclaimed my life. And in the end, I know with absolute certainty who the richer one is.